everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I am your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Lewis L. Reed. Lewis is a passionate advocate for criminal justice reform, a sought after speaker and changemaker dedicated to second chances. After serving nearly 14 years in federal prison, he transformed his experience into a powerful mission, helping formerly incarcerated individuals rebuild their lives and successfully reintegrate into society. As a policy expert and former senior director of membership and partnerships at dream.org, he has worked closely with lawmakers, business leaders, and community organizations to drive meaningful change in the justice system. He has advised the Biden-Harris administration, testified before Congress, and contributed to bipartisan legislation aimed at reducing recidivism. Beyond policy, he's an entrepreneur and consultant, using his platform to break down systematic barriers and empower others to redefine their futures. His journey is one of resilience, redemption, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves the opportunity to succeed, no matter their past. You can find Lewis by searching him on Instagram at He Inspires for Real, or by going to his website, decodedStoryLab.com. Hello, Lewis. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
That was some type of introduction. Thank you. It's good being on with you.
Uh, it's all true stuff, and I've been able to connect with you on like so many times before, and your story really does, I think, open people's eyes, and the way you tell it really does demonstrate how sometimes life has you in situations, but you can really be the person who writes your story. And I want I'm going to dive into all that, but I want to start off with, what does success mean and look like to Lewis L. Reed?
When I think about success, Olivia, success for me isn't about accolades or applause. Success for me is about alignment. And for me, success means being able to look in the mirror and know that my purpose and my practices are in sync. It's when my lived experience as a formerly incarcerated person informs my leadership without defining my limitations. And so ultimately, success is about helping others unlock doors that they didn't know that they had keys to.
I, I love that. And I also love the fact, and I want to highlight this because I did not highlight this in your intro, is you actually have the key and have been given the key to the city of Bridgeport, which is the place that your story really began. And it just shows what you said. And I think it also highlights, and is such an impactful piece to highlight, is that it was that circle moment of that's where your story began. And then the city recognizing the individual you are today, because you're right, it doesn't all come down to accolades and things like that, and I don't think those things should define you. But when others do those kinds of I don't want to even use the word gesture necessarily, but recognition, it's like, okay, you see me and you see the individuals that are going through similar things as well. Can you dive in a little bit about your story and what got you to be incarcerated for nearly 14 years?
Yeah, well, what's still present for me, just even back to the success piece, because oftentimes we have a tendency to want to leapfrog to the front of the line, and we think that success is as instantaneous as the viral clips that we see in our social media feeds. And I just also wanted to just add as a PS to the thought that I had about success, right? Like, in addition, success to me isn't about income. It's really about when impact outweighs income. And it's not really so much about the commas that's in your check, but it's really about the change that you can effectuate in your community. And so when I think about, because I really want to drive home the notion about success is not something that is microwavable or something that you can put in an air fryer and boom, you have something within a matter of minutes. It's really measured in between the white space. One of the things I tell people is that when you read my bio and when you read my resume, you'll see things that might be glowing in interest. The people that I work for, the things that I've been able to accomplish, the accolades that I've been able to rack up, etc. But in effect, it's within the white space. It's within the white space that my true story shows up. It's the 14 years in federal prison that you just asked me about. How was my life transformed in between that time? It's within the white space where it doesn't necessarily show up in my resume or my bio, but when both of my parents were incarcerated when I was 5 years old. And I had to make up stories when I went to school about where my parents were. It's within the white space when I was shot when I was 14 years old and how I grew up in an environment that wasn't conducive for growth. It was ripe and chock full of criminal enterprising. And so for me, when I first hit the system, it felt like the world had hit pause on my humanity. You go from being who you think is a person, a father, a son, a brother, etc., a friend, to being a number. And one day I remember I looked around and I realized that if I didn't control my narrative, the system would. So ultimately, what did I do? I picked up books instead of beefs. I, traded street cred for self-worth. And for me, that was the turning point when I realized that my sentence didn't necessarily have to be my story.
And I think what you just mentioned there is so important as well, is understanding for yourself that you don't have to be the number. You have that story. And so many individuals, when they hit hard times or go through life altering situations that might have not been something they thought they were going to have to go through in life, they go, okay, I'm one of the stats, I'm one of the things. And they lean into that and they really say, okay, but you decided to take the other route, which I think more people need to understand is an option, is not letting that number identify who you are, and lean into that purpose and then go, okay, what can I be doing? What empowerment can I be giving myself today? And then leverage that outside of whatever environment they're going through. Because that, to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't just help you in that real time as something is going on in your life, get you through it, but it also helps mentally as well. Was there a time where you were having that issue?
I think that I've had that issue throughout the entirety of my life. I also would be remiss not to point to my faith. When I was incarcerated, I started looking at Jesus not just from a redemption perspective, but from a revolutionary perspective. I started looking at how he challenged a unjust Roman criminal legal system, how he was arrested without a warrant based off of fake and frivolous allegations. He went through a kangaroo court of a trial. He was excessively prosecuted. He was disproportionately sentenced for a misdemeanor offense that ultimately got him capital punishment. And so when I started really looking at what Jesus represented, and the principles that he espoused, not from a do unto others as you want them to do unto you perspective, but really how do we challenge social biases? How do we, in effect, show up for the least of these? Who are the least of these in these United States of America? It's the more than 70 million people in our communities who have criminal histories. When Christ said that on the day of judgment, we won't be evaluated by how many followers we had, how many times we went viral, if whether or not we have more degrees than the thermometer, or any of that stuff. Jesus said that on the day of judgment, one of the things that we will be asked is, what did you do with the least of these? Somebody in their sarcasm and or their ignorance is going to respond, when did we see you in prison? When did we see you in need of food? When did we see you in need of a hug? When did we see you in need of some humanity? And Jesus said, whatsoever you did unto the least of these, you did also unto me. And so the work that I do, that was that I believe prison was a catalyst for, was ultimately to lead me to be in ministry, i.e., being in service of other people for the least of these.
And that being said, and that catalyst for change, was there a moment when you were in prison where that light bulb went off to say, yes, I'm going to lean into my faith? I'm going to be the person who serves in this space. Or was it just something that happened over time?
I think that there was there was a it was a combination of one of two things. There was a moment that I had with a mentor uh, when I was incarcerated, who in effect challenged me to mentally unlearn survival and relearn self-worth. Practically, he challenged me to read everything that I can get my hands on. And he also elevated my thinking to make the law library my sanctuary. And so the hardest part for me was being able to do the deep internal work in a place that is designed and constructed and built to break you. And so oftentimes people glamorize the comeback, but they don't talk about the quiet nights where hope feels like contraband when you're incarcerated.
Can you tell us about some of those nights and really what it's like? Because, like you said, and I think in certain environments, television areas like that, it does get glamorized of what it is really like, and there is a lot of different stories. But when you pull back the curtain, there's a lot of things that still aren't being said about what individuals experience and how that truly affects them long term.
Well, I think that when we specifically talk about people who are incarcerated, it's easy to dichotomize and separate one from the other. Those people who are incarcerated have to build up a degree of resilience that is akin to the spring in a ballpoint pen. However, when you personalize that, you can look no further than your own life, and you can look at how you have landed in the winner circle of life. No matter how respective that winner circle may be, no matter how you might define success for yourself. And you can see what those long and lonely nights were for you. Think about the nurse who had to work two jobs, go to school, and raise children on her own in order to be able to commence across the stage and to get her nursing degree. Think about the educator who, in effect, is taking a portion of his or her salary in order to be able to contribute to students in a classroom based off of the resources that the school district may not be given, and those kids go on to be great in their respective fields. Nobody sees the back end. Nobody really understands what it took in order for those people to either A, stand in the winner circle themselves, and or B, for somebody to contribute for someone else to be in a winner circle. And so I think that when you zoom out from a 300-foot perspective and you lift up to a 30,000-foot perspective, every one of us can identify with lonely nights. Every one of us can identify with what it's like in order to be able to have nobody else to support you other than yourself to make it through a particular moment that ultimately lands you in the space in life where you worked hard to be.
One thing I have brought up before is how on social media and in all these spaces, so many times people only talk about those A-list moments, as I call them, and not those B, C list moments or experiences they have or what happens in the day to day. Based on what you just said, why do you think people don't lean into talking about those lonely nights as
because we
much.
because we want a moment, and we don't want a movement. The movement is everything that leads you to where you are. The moment is that A-list flash in a pan, viral, being on stage, having a spotlight on you, etc. It encompasses all of that. When you think about the greatest, when you think about the greatest in whatever industry that you respect, whether it's the music industry, whether we're talking about people like Madonna, MJ, um, uh, Quincy Jones, etc. Those individuals, Beyonce, Jay Z, those individuals, they did not all of a sudden appear on stage. They started when they were young. They started perfecting their craft when they were young. They started in the dark. They started in the shadows. And everybody celebrates the light that they're in. When you think about basketball, people like Kobe, people like Isaiah Thomas, people like Michael Jordan, people like Magic Johnson and LeBron, when everybody else is out of the gym, they still practicing after the game. They hit 40 and they wonder why they didn't hit 50. Before everyone else shows up for the game, they're in the gym. When they were kids, they had to forego playing outside with peers that was doing everything else that might be popular because they were working on a craft. And so I think that we live in a very entitled and in a very instantaneous world where nobody wants to put the work in. Nobody wants to do the shadow work. Everybody wants to appear in the light. Everybody wants the moment, but nobody wants to do what it takes in order to build up the momentum and or to put in the work for the movement.
I love how you bring in the analogy of the movement, and you need the movement to make the moment happen. And I think I 100% agree with you that one of my biggest pet peeves when I talk to other people in different age brackets now is like, okay, how fast can I get there? I'm going to start this business. How fast do you think I could get to this money point or this or that? Or just like, let's throw all these things, we'll just implement all these things, it'll happen faster. And I'm like, you gotta get your hands dirty. You
Yeah.
have to you have to be willing to put in the hours, the time learning, all these things to understand and have the right conversations at the right time with the right people. You know,
Think about this from a physical perspective. You don't go from being a newborn to a 21-year-old being able to buy beer on your own or alcohol on your own type of person or adult overnight. It doesn't happen. There's a degree of growth that you have to go through. Everyone who I know that has ever been a child of some sort was in a rush to be an adult. Now that we are adults, we want to go back to childhood, right? And so what the point that I'm trying to lean into in that is that anything that is worth everything doesn't happen overnight. Bishop Jakes told me that. He said, any business endeavor, anything that is worth substance, anything that is going to be worth everything to you, it's not going to happen overnight. Deals, whether that's production deals, whether it's a business deal of any kind, whether it's love, whether it's a relationship, doesn't matter. It doesn't mature overnight. Those things take time. And I think that we want to expedite the time that it's going to take in order to be able to put in the work to land in a place of success. But we don't understand on the back end of that, there's a degree of appreciation. You grow with people, you are able to filter other folks out who may not necessarily have your best interests at heart when they see all of the shine, but they haven't experienced the grind.
one thing too is I feel like when you put in that work and you understand the value of putting in that time and work to get to where you want to be, like you said, there's such a appreciation when you get there, but you start to realize that over time, the people you surround yourself, you you learn something from each one of them. I remember, and this is something I literally said this past week. I use it all the time. We met when we were going through the TEDx experience, and you were our coach and you were a speaker. And one thing, one of the very first times we got on a call to go through the experience and you jumped on and you said this, and it has always stuck with me with everything I do now, is your words matter. Make the word try out. Make every word try out. And now every time I prep for a speech, anytime like someone's like, okay, there's this word count for this presentation I need to do, whatever it might be. I don't know if this is too long. Can you review it? And I'm like, did you make every word try out? They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, think about it. It's really genius. So I'm like, you don't want to have to reiterate things. If the words don't need to be there to make the impact, they shouldn't be in there. And it's something like even that experience, I never thought words can have that impact and go both ways until you brought it to me while we were going through that experience. And you sat there and you're like making sure every word tries out. And then to this day now I'm like, is every word trying out? Does it need to be there?
Mhm.
And so it's like one of those things for you, as you after you left being incarcerated and you transitioned back into the community, what was that like for you?
I think that when I transitioned back into the community, I realized that after I was locked up, I was still locked out. I was locked out of housing. I was locked out of employment. I was locked out of the more than 46,000 social sanctions that have been levied against people like me who have convictions in this country. And never forget this. During the pandemic, I went to use my credit card. And when I went to use my credit card, here it is. I had a 760 credit score. And, I had an unsecured credit card with Capital One. And I went to use my credit card, and my credit card was declined. And I always paid my payments. My card um, literally had a zero balance. And when I went to call Credit Capital One, they told me that my card had been rescinded. And I said, for what reason? And they told me it was because I had a criminal history. And if I wasn't an advocate, I would have laid down and accepted that and tried to apply somewhere else. However, my grandmother taught me a notion. Never call people out on anything if you're not going to call them into something greater and up to something higher. So I wrote an op-ed that was titled, What's in Your Wallet? Racism if you have Capital One. And I talked about how the collateral consequences of a criminal history is exactly that. You being able to have a credit card rescinded because you have a criminal history, in addition to the other barriers that it takes for you to overcome in order to be able to just survive and thrive in this society. You can take my taxes, but you can lock me out of the vote. I'm no longer incarcerated, but I'm still in a prison while I'm walking around in a so-called free society. And so coming home wasn't just about crossing a gate. It was really about stepping into a world that had moved on without me. And the first thing that I noticed, everything felt fast. People were staring at screens. I didn't understand the language. I hadn't heard that before, and making decisions that I didn't feel equipped to make. But really, what really shook me wasn't the technology, it was the quiet. It was the quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from not knowing where you belong. I had freedom, but I didn't have footing. And so the hardest part for me wasn't finding a job. Yes, that was a challenge. I had to support a family and friends, and a great, strong social network. But the challenge, the hardest part for me wasn't about finding a job or housing. It was learning how to believe in myself again, to look people in the eye and not flinch, wondering if they saw me based off of my past or if they saw me based off of my potential. And when I think about transitioning, it's not about necessarily the me, but my experience is about the we, it's about the collective. It's about other people who I know who experience those things day in and night out. They seem to be overlooked and undervalued in a world where we say we believe in second chances, but those second chances have a qualifier depending on what zip code you come from, depending on how affluent you are, depending on how many financial resources you have access to, etc. Second chances in this country comes with a qualifier.
I think that's so important to identify and bring the conversation to the table, because there's so many times where, and I feel like too, big companies get to say, well, you don't meet this. You can't do this because of that. And it's like, wait, you don't even know who I am. You're, it's going back to kind of what you said earlier, the number. You're looking at me as a number. You're looking at the boxes I check. If it's great for you, then yes, you'll put me in. If it's not, then it's a no. And I think a lot of times, if people are just given that race by bigger companies, when it comes to credit cards, when it comes to maybe deciding to start that business and getting that loan or getting the house they want and being able to have different freedoms and opportunities, whatever it might be, that runaway teen because he or she didn't feel safe at home, being able to be able to rent a place at 18 years old, even though they don't have a credit score or other things. Looking at the situation as a whole and saying, yes, like we're not going to not say yes because of this box is so important. And I want to transition now into one of your life passions and something you've now become a massive voice in such a important conversation to have, and that is uh, the prison reform. And from your work with dream.org to advising on national policy, you become a leader on justice reform. Can you share how your lived experience shaped the way you advocate today?
I think that any and everything that I do comes from a place of personal impact. My advocacy is rooted in proximity, it's not rooted in politics. I don't approach prison reform from a distance. I don't approach justice reform from a distance. I approach it from the inside out. I have felt the weight of handcuffs. I've heard the sound of cell doors locking behind me. That's something that you don't forget. I've lived in a system that punishes people for being poor, for being black, for being broken, and then offers them no roadmap out. And so when I speak about justice reform, I'm not reciting stats. I'm not recalling statistics. I'm I'm recalling my scars. And when I was at dream.org and when I was also at Reform Alliance and Cut 50 that was rebranded into dream.org uh, um, uh, uh, thereafter, even most recently when I was at the Douglas Project, we weren't lobbying for legislation. We were elevating lived experience. And we built coalitions that didn't just look good on paper, they looked like the people most impacted. And a friend of mine always talks about this notion, those closest to the problem being closest to the solution, but furthest from resources and power. I wanted to bridge that gap. When I advise on national policy, I ask one question: Will this change matter to the man or woman in a cell block? If the answer is no, we go back to the drawing board and we center the voices of those who are closest to the problem because they are closest to the solution. People who are in the prison house don't care who's in the White House so long as they can get back to their mama's house and or their own house. And so because reform to me is personal, it's beyond politics. And my lived experience taught me that the system is functioning exactly as it was designed to. My work today isn't a, is really about redesigning it. How do we redesign a system that has been set up for failure? We do it with justice, we do it with dignity, and in all actuality, I think that we do it with humanity at the center of everything that we do.
Why? And this can sound kind of like a simple question, but I think it's such an important question to ask. Why do you think that philosophy moves the needle so much more than someone coming in and say, okay, I'm going to be a policymaker, we're going to change these policies, this is how we're going to do it, and not having that lived experience?
That's like asking what's the difference between a pie that you buy at your grocery store and a pie that your mama or your grandmama makes? It's the heart and the soul that's baked into every single morsel, every ingredient. Yeah, yeah, you might be able to buy a Patty LaBelle pie at Walmart, and this is no indictment on Patty LaBelle pies, but you might be able to buy a mass commercial made pie, and it may taste all right, but it ain't nothing like your grandmama's pie. It ain't gonna be nothing like how your grandmama gonna make ziti. It ain't gonna be nothing like how your grandmama gonna make mac and cheese or fried chicken or whatever the dish that really salivates your taste buds. And so it's the heart and soul. What you ask is a powerful question. And the truth is, like, lived experience is the difference between theory and truth. It's the difference between theory and truth. You can't fix a system you've never survived. You can't study incarceration. I meant to say that you can study incarceration. You can read reports. You can even tour a prison. But until you sat in that cell, wondering if the world forgot about you, you'll never be able to fully grasp the stakes. And so, lived experience brings a moral urgency that policymakers alone can't replicate. And when I think about advocacy, for me, I don't just advocate because it's my job. I advocate because it's my life. My parents were incarcerated. I got more people, cousins, friends, other family members, etc., that's done more time and who have matriculated through the prison systems than who I know graduated from high school, let alone having matriculated through college. And so I know what it feels like to be reduced to a DOC number, to lose birthdays, to miss funerals, to be treated as disposable. And I also know what freedom tastes like when you fight for it. And so the kind of insight that changes how you build policy is going to be from a personal space. It's not abstract, it's intimate. And it forces you to ask the question, who's being left out? What is the human cost?
And I gotta say, I love how you brought up there the tying it to family members cooking. As you were saying that too, I was thinking about my grandma making her a famous icebox cake, and
Mhm.
that she would instill in us, and like, my mama tries, my mom, Lucy's met my mom. She tries to make it. It's not the same, and hopefully she won't listen to that part. She'll skip past this part. But there's also, when you think about that, the lessons you've learned, the lessons that have been passed down, those experiences that get passed down in those moments. And I want to, that being said, I think another important aspect to touch upon here is having a seat at the table. and having that seat to have the conversation that needs to be had. So, how did you make sure you had the seat at the right tables to have the right discussions? And because you've also shared seats, not only making policy change and sitting in front of Congress, but also talking to individuals like Oprah, Jay-Z, making sure their organizations are having conversations and making an impact in the right way. So there's so many different seats you have taken charge and gotten and made sure you had. But how do you do that?
I think that when I walked into rooms, there wasn't any seats that was reserved for Lewis L. Reed.
Mhm.
I looked around the table and all of the seats at the table were occupied. So I had to build mine, sometimes from scratch, sometimes from scraps. And nobody handed me a chair and said, "Come sit with us." I had to earn my way into rooms by first owning my story and then sharpening my voice and then being undeniable in the spaces that I walked into. I didn't lead with credentials, I led with credibility. And that credibility was forged through the experiences most people only read about. My grandmother used to tell me this notion: never lead a conversation with your education or your title, because people will calculate the level of respect that they give you based off of that. And I want to be clear, getting getting a seat, I should say, is one thing. Knowing what to say once you're there, that's what keeps the seat warm. Getting the seat at the table is one thing, whether somebody provides space for you or you create your own. But knowing what to say once you're there, that's what keeps the seat warm. And when I sat with people like Jay and lawmakers and corporate execs, I brought truth that made them pause. I didn't just bring stats. I brought stories, real people, real pain, real potential. And I made the system personal for them. And so when you think about sometimes people who are in these spaces, there's a difference between people who have something to say and people who want to say something. I'm not one of those people where I want to say something. I'm one of those people where I have something to say. And I didn't just talk, I translated. I showed them how their platforms, their policies, and their philanthropy could, in effect, shift culture and also outcomes. And that's how you move from symbolic inclusion to strategic impact. And the key, in effect, if there's a PS that I might be able to add, is you don't beg for a seat. You build your own table. You bring your own chair if you have to. And ultimately, what you do is you make the conversation so powerful that they can't look away, that they re-invite you back into the next convening that they have. And or rather than waiting on them, you build a room for yourself and you bring other people in.
That being said, as you build your table and your seat in your rooms, what do you try to make sure other people learn from those experiences that you get to you share, you make sure there's conversation around, and make sure that when they show up to the table in your room and everything, that they are there for the right reasons? Because there's, let's be honest, there's people out there that want to jump on other people's coattails.
Mhm. I'm thinking about something that's coming up for me. There was a time where I was privileged, and rightfully so, to be in spaces with other people. Now I'm in a place in life where and I don't say this with a degree of arrogance in any way, shape, or form, but I also think that now it's a privilege for other people to share space with me. And every room that I walk into it with this mindset. I'm not here to be the only. I'm here to make sure that I'm not the last. And there's a different perspective that I take when I'm moving into spaces with people at this age and stage in my life. I do it with a degree of humility. I do it with a degree of great uh, privilege to be in spaces and to breathe rare air with folks. But when I build a seat at a table or I earn a seat there, I'm thinking about the next person coming in behind me who hasn't yet had the mic. They haven't yet had the platform. They haven't yet had the opportunity. And here's what it is that I try to pass on to those individuals. Number one, I think that your story is your superpower. You can't shrink to fit in. You have to expand the room with it. I'll tell you a very quick story. One time we were in a board meeting, and when this is when I was at Reform Alliance, and I had took off my hat when the board members, out of respect, when they walked in the room, and Jay Z has said to me, he was like, "Lou, how come you took your hat off?" And I was like, "Yo, I just want to be respectful, like to the room." He said, "When you walk in a room, you walk in a room." And in effect, what he was telling me is that you don't shrink. You bring the full personhood of who you are into the room. It wasn't because the hat that I had on was a Paper Planes. It wasn't because there was Rock Nation branding, etc. In other words, what he was saying is that my story is my superpower and I don't have to shrink to fit in. I expand the room with it. The next thing that I share with people is that access means nothing without accountability. If you get in the room and forget your people, you've already lost. If there's a third thing that I would pass on to individuals is that relationships move faster than resumes. You have to build trust, not just networks. You got to be able to build trust, not necessarily just networks. I think that we live in a time and space where everybody is about network, 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 and nobody's thinking about relationship. Everybody wants to be transactional, but few people are thinking about relationships. And last but not least, one of the things that I would pass on to people is that presence is power. Presence is power, but preparation is protection. And so you can't just show up. You got to be able to show out with strategy. I'll share something pointing to personal privilege. Recently, there was someone in the city of Bridgeport in Connecticut, where I'm from, who was unfortunately shot down by the Bridgeport police. And there were a lot of people who are on social media resharing, reposting, expressing their anger, rightfully so, expressing their outrage. And when folks reach out to me to see if whether or not I would get involved in the advocacy and if I would get involved in the organizing, one of the questions that I asked them is that, are you concerned about outrage or do you want outcomes? And back to my last point about presence being power, but preparation is about protection. If you don't just show up with outcomes, all you're going to be left with is outrage. You have to be able to show out with strategy. And I want people to know that we don't have to wait to be invited. We can create. And when we do, the goal isn't just inclusion, it has to be transformation. You got to be able to bring others with you. You got to be able to pull up more chairs. You got to be able to change the menu. You got to be able to rewrite the agenda. That's how you turn a seat at the table into a movement.
I feel like, Lewis, you've been dropping knowledge bombs this whole, like such powerful knowledge bombs this whole time. I'm just like, usually I'm doing more questions. I'm like, Lewis, you just have the floor. Like you just your experiences, but the way that you're able to take those experiences and articulate the important moments and knowledge bombs all the time. I am just like that in itself, I feel like is such a superpower because we all have lived experiences And we all have those challenges that got in our way, even if we don't wear them, and people could see them, right? And acknowledge them. We all go through our own battles. But I think being able to express it, such nuggets, such I just your knowledge nuggets always get me. They're my favorite. I know we're getting towards the end of time, but there's definitely one thing I want to bring up. You also released a documentary recently, and your company is leaning more into telling stories. For you, why was that the next step you wanted to take in demonstrating and educating individuals?
We live in a culture where every time you pick up your phone, someone is telling a story in some way, shape, or form. They're telling a story through a dance on TikTok. They're telling a story through a reel on Instagram. They're telling a story through a tweet on X. They're telling a story through a post on Facebook or any other medium that you use. Stories shift cultural perspectives. Policies may change laws, but storytelling is going to change hearts. And after years of doing work behind the scenes, passing bills, building campaigns, advising administrations, etc., I realized something that in my mind is profound. People don't just move because you give them data. They move when you give them a reason to care. And that reason almost always starts with a story. That's why I launched the Coded Story Lab and why I am featured in When Does Freedom Begin? Because I needed to show people what justice, injustice, and redemption look like through human eyes, not just headlines. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. We need to show what redemption, what injustice, and what justice also looks like from the lens of human eyes, not just from headlines. And so stories cut through politics. Stories transcend partisanship. They say this is not just a statistic. This is somebody's father, their sister, their mother, their son, their family member. This is somebody that's returning back to our community. So for me, this was a natural next step. I've testified before Congress, but I also wanted to testify before the culture. And I want to shape how people feel and not just necessarily how they vote. I think that if we can shift public conscience, then policy will follow. And anything that I do, I want it to be for justice impacted people to see that their reflection is in the media is not just the stereotypes from the headline that they may have associated with them through a Google search. I want them to know that my story matters, my voice matters, my future isn't necessarily finished.
Louis, that's so powerful. And I agree. I think everyone's voice matters so much. And we sometimes forget because of the environment we are, the power our voice, the power our words, the power our experiences have, not just for us, but the people around us, the community we build, the community we're in, the rooms that we're in, all those environments. Louis, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on any social media. Yeah, I'm on any social media platform. You can find me at Louis L. Reed, Louis, letter Lreed. Whether that's on X, whether that's on Twitter, whether it's on TikTok. I wasn't home for MySpace, so don't look for me there. I was incarcerated. But any social media platform you can find me on at Louis L. Reed.
Well, thank you, Louis, for all of your amazing insight today.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.
I loved it. And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation. Not that I could sum them all up, because Lewis, like I said, gave us so much knowledge nuggets that I really can't. So I'm going to try to hit on some of them. But the first one is, what happens between the white space? I think that was such a powerful message, and something we all have to take time to absorb and realize is it doesn't always matter what's on your resume or what's the words on the paper that describe you, your bio, all these things that we use every single day to be in a room, to have a discussion, whatever it might be. But it's what's happening between those lines in that white space that really matter, what really make the impact. And ask yourself, what identifies me in that white space? What am I doing in that white space? What are the stories that could get told? As well as unlearn survival and learn self-worth. I think sometimes, no matter where we are in life, there are times and moments where we're in survival mode. And you might be there for so long and in that space. Like Lewis said, there's times where you have to unlearn skill sets, whatever that might be. And I think it's important to realize there's times you need to be in survival mode. I think it's something we all need to understand the power of and lean into at times. But there's times you also have to realize the power and lean into learning self-worth, as well as think about the lonely nights are like for you. I love how Lewis brought this up about his experiences and individuals who are incarcerated, and how we might not be thinking about those experiences and what it's like to relate. Some of us might not know someone who's been incarcerated, might not know what the experiences are like, but we're all relatable. And I think it's so important how Lewis brought up those lonely nights, because there's times we all have lonely nights. And what are those lonely nights and those moments that you go through that aren't being talked about? The toughness, the times you're standing alone. Think about that, lean into that. And then when you're no longer standing alone and you have people standing beside you, discuss what those lonely nights were like. Use your voice, as well as no one wants a movement, they only want the moment. I think in today's age, this is such an important aspect, and it is true. We all want those A-list moments, but you need to be moving and doing things and understand there will be those B, C-list moments that happen in your life. It isn't just about the TikTok trend that's happening or going viral. As well as build your own seat, build your own table, and know what to say when you get there. I love how Lewis brought this up, and it isn't about always having a seat at the table. Sometimes you got to build the seat, whatever that looks like, even from scratch, as Lewis said. But it's not just about getting that seat, right? You have to earn that seat, but you also have to understand and know and learn what to say when you get there. Because one of the overarching themes I think of this conversation is really using your voice to make an impact and understanding the power of your words. So when you have that seat, you have to understand the power your words hold and be prepared to show up in the right way and use your words accordingly. And lastly, is your story is your superpower. So understand, no matter what your story, your journey is, where you might be in that story, it is your superpower. No one else has your story. So use it, use those experiences, and make a positive impact in the world. And the last thing, based on that, I want to challenge everyone to do today is understand, to take some time, understand your story and how you can make a positive impact by advocating for someone else, helping build a seat at a table, whatever it might be. But how can you use your story and your voice to make a positive impact? And try to do that this week. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Lewis L. Reed. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.